I never thought I'd be the guy caught halfway between jeans and boxers with my crush just standing there, eyes locked on me like I was some kind of open book. And yet, there he was. Caleb, leaning against the doorframe, not flinching, not looking away, just quietly watching as I scrambled to button up my shirt. Let me back up a bit because honestly, it wasn't supposed to happen like this. I'd been crushing on Caleb for months. He's this kind of guy you can't help but notice. Tall, with that messy dark hair that always looks like he just ran his hands through it, and eyes that somehow managed to be both sharp and warm at the same time. We worked together at this small marketing agency downtown, and usually, I was the one trying to catch his glance across the room, or make some lame joke to get him to smile. That day, I was in my apartment, which is barely big enough for one person, let alone two. Caleb had come over to help me fix my computer. He's way better with tech than I am, and honestly, I was just excited for an excuse to spend some time with him outside of work. We'd chatted casually, mostly about work stuff, and a little about music, when I decided to change into something more comfortable before we got started. I thought I was alone. The door was closed. The sound of Caleb fiddling with my keyboard was coming from the living room, and I was in my cramped bedroom trying not to knock over my half-empty coffee cup. So when the door suddenly opened, and I looked up to see Caleb standing there, I froze. Not because he was there, because I kind of expected it eventually, but because of how steady his gaze was. No awkward glance away. No embarrassed smile. Just this quiet, intense look that made my heart thump in a way I didn't know was possible. It was the kind of moment that could have been totally mortifying, but instead, it felt strangely real. Like he wasn't just seeing my awkward, half-dressed self, but something more underneath all the nerves and fumbling. And for a second, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, he felt it too. But then he cleared his throat and finally said, "You okay?" In that low, casual way that somehow made everything feel less weird, even as I fumbled with my shirt. I nodded because, honestly, I didn't know what else to do. And that was just the beginning. I nodded because, honestly, I didn't know what else to do. And that was just the beginning. I finished buttoning up my shirt, trying to act like it was no big deal that Caleb had just caught me mid-change, but inside, my brain was doing somersaults. The thing is, I'm usually pretty chill, but suddenly, I was hyper-aware of every inch of my skin, every little sound in the room, even the way my shirt felt against my skin. Caleb stepped fully into the room after a beat, closing the door behind him quietly. He didn't say much, just glanced around like he was taking in my chaotic little place. I realized then that despite working together for months, I'd never invited him over before. Partly because I'm not great at opening my space up to people, and partly because, well, I was scared of what it might mean if I did. So Caleb said, kneeling down to inspect my computer, "This thing really hates you, huh?" I laughed, the tension loosening just a bit. Yeah, it's like it knows I'm not tech savvy and decides to make my life miserable. He smiled, that easy, warm smile that always made me feel like I was the only person in the world he was talking to. I kind of forgot that we were still standing in my bedroom, both of us in close quarters, the awkward moment hanging somewhere between us. "Mind if I sit?" Caleb asked, nodding toward the small couch I'd crammed into the corner. "Please," I said, clearing some space for him. He sat down, laptop on his knees, fingers flying over the keys. I watched him for a moment, marveling at how natural he seemed in my messy little space. We'd spent so many hours together in the office, but this was different. More personal. There was a quiet comfort in that, but also this strange buzz in the air that I couldn't quite place. Like we were both waiting for something to happen, but didn't know what. So, I said, trying to break the silence that was starting to feel heavy in a good way, "I owe you dinner, right? For rescuing me from my own stupid computer." Caleb looked up and met my eyes. "Only if you promise to cook." I blinked. "Cook? Since when do you want me to cook?" He grinned, that mischievous glint lighting up his eyes. "Since I'm starting to think you might be more interesting than just the guy who burns microwave popcorn." We both laughed. I felt my chest loosen even more, like the walls I'd built around myself were starting to crack just a bit. Maybe it was the way he looked at me, unguarded and real, or the way the afternoon light filtered through the curtains. But suddenly, I felt brave enough to say something I'd been holding back. I said carefully, "I've wanted to ask you out for a while now, but didn't know how." Caleb raised an eyebrow, still smiling. "Really? You never gave me that impression." "Yeah, well, I'm not great at hiding stuff when I care about it." I looked down at my hands, suddenly shy. "I guess I was scared it'd make things weird between us." He leaned back, thoughtful. "Honestly, I've been feeling something too, but wasn't sure if you were on the same page." Those words hit me like a punch and a warm hug at the same time. Suddenly, the clock ticking, the hum of the computer, the cluttered apartment, all of it faded into the background. "So," I said, heart pounding, "want to give this a shot? Maybe start with dinner and take it from there?" Caleb's smile widened. "I'd like that." We ended up spending the next hour wrapped up in fixing my computer and talking about everything but work. It was easy, like sliding into a rhythm we hadn't realized was waiting for us. Later, as he packed up his things to head out, I found myself hoping this wasn't the last time he'd stand in my bedroom doorway, looking at me like I was the only thing that mattered. And maybe, just maybe, I wasn't wrong. After Caleb left that evening, I sat on my couch for a long time just staring at the door, a bit dumbfounded by how everything had suddenly shifted. I wasn't used to this, the whole "maybe this could actually happen" feeling. It made my chest tight and my mind race, but in the best way possible. The next morning, I showed up at work with a stupid grin plastered on my face. Caleb noticed immediately. He caught me by the coffee machine, leaning in with this sly look like he was trying not to laugh. "Morning, sleepyhead," he said, his voice low and teasing. I rolled my eyes but felt my cheeks heat up. "Hey, don't start with me." "Can't help it," he shrugged. "You look like you slept on a cloud or something." "Whatever," I said, trying to sound casual but failing. The truth was, I had barely slept at all, thinking about last night and what might come next. We ended up working side by side all day, sneaking glances and sharing small smiles that felt like secret messages only we understood. At lunch, he texted me, just a quick, "What are you doing tonight?" And my heart practically exploded. I wasn't sure if I was ready to jump into anything too fast, so I suggested we keep it simple. "How about dinner at my place? I'll cook, you bring your terrible taste in music." He laughed, and we agreed on the plan. That night, I was a nervous wreck. I don't know why. Cooking for someone you like should be normal, right? But there I was, standing in my tiny kitchen, trying not to burn the garlic bread, while simultaneously wondering if I should put on some music Caleb would actually enjoy. When he arrived, he had that familiar easy smile, holding a small bottle of wine like a peace offering. We cracked jokes over chopping vegetables and laughing about how neither of us was exactly Gordon Ramsay. As the evening went on, the conversation drifted from silly to serious without any awkward moments in between. We talked about childhood dreams, the weird things about growing up gay in a small town, and those moments where you suddenly realize you're not alone anymore. At some point, I caught Caleb watching me again. Not in that accidental caught you spying way, but like he was genuinely seeing me. And I swear, the way his eyes softened made my heart skip. After dinner, we ended up on the couch, wine glasses in hand, the night stretching out comfortably between us. I felt brave enough to ask the question that had been on my mind all day. "So," I started, "what made you stay that day when you walked in on me?" He grinned, obviously amused I was bringing it up again. "Honestly, I was curious. You looked vulnerable, but not like you wanted me to look away. It was kind of refreshing." I looked down, fiddling with my glass. "I was scared you'd be weirded out." Caleb shook his head. "Nah, I'm more interested in figuring out what's behind that nervous smile of yours." It hit me then that everything I'd been hiding, the awkwardness, the doubts, the hopes, was suddenly okay to share. Before I knew it, Caleb leaned in, and I didn't pull away. Our lips met, and it felt like the start of something real. When we finally pulled apart, breathless and grinning like idiots, he whispered, "So, does this mean I'm officially your boyfriend now?" I laughed, heart pounding. "Yeah, I think it does." From that night on, Everything between us felt different, easier, warmer, like coming home after a long day. I still catch myself thinking about that moment when he didn't look away. Maybe that was when I realized I could stop hiding and just be me around him. And honestly, that's the best feeling in the world. After that night, things between Caleb and me started to feel like they were unfolding in slow motion, like we were both savoring every small step, every glance, every touch. It wasn't one of those whirlwind romances that hit you like a freight train. It was more like waking up to sunlight streaming through the blinds, gentle but impossible to ignore. We kept seeing each other outside of work, mostly in my apartment or at some random coffee shop where Caleb insisted on ordering the strangest drinks just to mess with me. One evening, maybe a couple of weeks after our official start, we were sitting on my couch watching a stupid movie neither of us really cared about. Caleb was sprawled across the cushions, one arm over the backrest, the other absent-mindedly brushing against my knee. I remember how calm it felt, the kind of quiet that isn't awkward but comfortable, like we'd settled into a space where we didn't have to pretend or perform. Then, out of nowhere, he shifted and looked at me with this mix of something soft and serious. "Hey," he said, voice low. "Yeah?" He hesitated, then smiled like he was about to admit to something embarrassing. "I've been thinking about how that first moment went, the one where I walked in on you changing," I chuckled. "You mean the moment we both acted like it didn't happen?" "Exactly that," he said, grinning. "But honestly, I think that was the moment I realized I wanted to know everything about you, all the messy, awkward, real parts. It hit me harder than I expected. Because, yeah, I'd been holding back pieces of myself, afraid of being judged or rejected. But Caleb? He made me feel like those parts were worth sharing. Feels weird to say now," I admitted, "but I was terrified you'd think I was some kind of weirdo." He shook his head. "I'm pretty sure I'm a weirdo myself, so it's fine." We laughed, but then he got serious again, his hand inching closer to mine. "Look, I don't want to rush anything or freak you out, but I'm really happy we took this step." I squeezed his hand, feeling this warmth spreading through my chest. Me too. That night, I realized how much I'd been craving that kind of connection. Not just the excitement of a crush, but the quiet certainty of someone who sees you and stays. Work was different now too. Instead of trying to hide my feelings every time Caleb was around, I found myself looking forward to the little moments. The way he'd tease me about my terrible coffee-making skills, or how we'd trade playlists between meetings. One afternoon we were grabbing lunch together, just the two of us, when Caleb suddenly asked, "So what's the plan? Are we just winging this?" Or, I blinked, caught off guard. "Winging what?" He smiled, that infuriatingly charming smile that made my stomach flip. "This. Us. Are we going to figure it out as we go, or what?" I pressed, leaning a little closer, "Or start planning our future as the most awkward couple ever." He joked. I laughed, but then I realized I liked the idea. Not because we needed a blueprint for everything, but because I wanted us to be something real, something solid. "I don't have a plan," I admitted, "but I'm willing to try if you are." He nodded, eyes serious for once. "I'm in." The days that followed were filled with all the little firsts that make a relationship feel alive. The first time we held hands in public, the first time we met each other's friends, the first lazy Sunday morning spent tangled up in blankets and bad breakfast tacos. But it wasn't always perfect. There were moments of doubt, awkward conversations about what we wanted, fears about how people at work might react, and the ever-present challenge of balancing our personal and professional lives. I remember one night, after a particularly rough day, Caleb came over and just held me while I vented about everything that felt overwhelming. There was no pressure, no judgment, just him, steady and sure, making the chaos seem a little less scary. In that moment, I realized that what made this different wasn't just the butterflies or the stolen glances. It was the feeling that, no matter what happened, I wasn't alone anymore. Looking back, that accidental moment when he walked in on me changing wasn't awkward or embarrassing. It was the start of something I never expected but didn't want to let go of. It was the moment I learned that sometimes the best connections come when you stop hiding and let someone in, and honestly, I can't wait to see where this goes. Things settled into a rhythm between Caleb and me that felt surprisingly natural, like finding a favorite song you didn't even know you liked until it played on the radio. But, of course, life never makes it that easy. There's always some curveball waiting around the corner, right? About a month into this us thing, I realized I hadn't told my roommate Luke yet. Luke's the sort of guy who's chill about everything, except when he's not. But I still felt this knot in my stomach about how he'd react to me dating a coworker, especially Caleb. Maybe it was the fear of messing up the vibe in our apartment, or just the usual anxiety of sharing something personal. One Saturday afternoon, Caleb and I were lounging on the couch, half watching some random sports game I couldn't care less about, when my phone buzzed with a text from Luke. "Dude, you around? We need to talk." My heart skipped. I showed Caleb the message, and he gave me a reassuring smile. "Want me to be there?" he asked. I shook my head, fumbling for a response, and typed back, "Yeah, I'm home." Luke came in a little later, his expression unreadable. He dropped his bag by the door and sat down opposite us, arms crossed. "So, spill," he said, looking straight at me. "Is there something you're not telling me?" I swallowed hard but took a deep breath. "Yeah, there is." I told him about Caleb, about how we met, the awkward moment when he walked in on me changing, and how that led to us dating. I watched Luke's face carefully, waiting for any sign of judgment or surprise. To my relief, he just nodded. "Okay, that's cool. I'm glad you told me." Caleb reached over and squeezed my hand under the coffee table, and I felt like a weight had lifted. Luke leaned back, cracking a small smile. "I guess this means I gotta get used to not being the only dude around here." We all laughed, and suddenly, the tension broke. It was one of those moments where I realized how important honesty was, even when it felt terrifying. A few weeks later, things at work took a turn. Rumors started swirling about Caleb and me. Nothing malicious, more like whispers and curious glances. I caught myself biting my lip during meetings, wondering if people were judging or whispering behind my back. One afternoon, Caleb and I stayed late, packing up after a long day. As we headed toward the elevators, he squeezed my shoulder and said quietly, "You okay?" I forced a smile. "Yeah. Just people talk." He nodded, eyes serious. "Let them. We know what we've got." That simple confidence made me feel braver. I realized I didn't want to hide anymore. Not from coworkers, friends, or even myself. So the next day, when a few colleagues casually asked about our relationship, I decided to stop deflecting. I talked openly about Caleb, about how we'd met, and how happy I was. It wasn't easy. There were awkward moments, some raised eyebrows, and a few jokes that landed a little too close for comfort. But there were also smiles, encouragement, and unexpected support. Caleb and I became this quiet team at work, sharing looks during meetings and subtle touches that said more than words ever could. One evening, a few months in, we found ourselves at my favorite rooftop bar, the city skyline sparkling behind us. Caleb ordered our drinks, and I watched him, thinking about how far we'd come. "Remember when you walked in on me that day?" I asked. He laughed, shaking his head. "How could I forget?" "Well," I said, "I'm glad you didn't look away." He reached over, tucking a stray hair behind my ear. "Me too." The night stretched on with easy conversation and quiet moments, and I felt this deep, steady happiness settle in my chest. Sure, we had our challenges ahead. Work, life, all the messy stuff that comes with letting someone in. But for the first time, I was ready to face it all. Because with Caleb, I wasn't just living. I was home. There was something about that night on the rooftop, the way the city lights shimmered around us while everything felt so calm and right, that made me realize how much I wanted Caleb in my life, no matter what came next. But as much as I was head over heels, I also knew relationships aren't just about the good moments. They come with real stuff too, the kind that makes you question and grow. A few days after that rooftop evening, I got hit with a curveball. I was at work, buried in emails, and trying to focus when my phone buzzed with a message from Caleb. "Can we talk?" Like, for real. I felt that familiar pit in my stomach. Caleb wasn't the type to say stuff like that unless something was bugging him. I texted back quickly, "Of course. What's up?" He replied, "Let's grab coffee after work." When we met at the little cafe across the street, Caleb looked different, more serious, less of his usual easygoing self. We grabbed a corner table and he took a deep breath. "I've been offered a job in Chicago," he said. My heart sank before I even had time to process. Chicago? That was hours away, a whole other life. "It's a big opportunity," he continued. "Something I can't just pass up. But I don't know what it means for us." We sat there, both quiet for a while. The noise of the cafe felt distant, like we were in our own bubble, trying to figure out how to navigate this unexpected fork in the road. I finally spoke up, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you want to do?" He looked at me, searching. "I want to be with you, but I also don't want to hold you back." I swallowed the lump in my throat and reached across the table, taking his hand. "Caleb, I don't want you to give up your dreams because of me, but I also don't want to lose what we have." He squeezed my hand gently, eyes shining with something I couldn't quite name. "Maybe we figure it out together? See where this goes?" I nodded, heart pounding. "Yeah, together." The weeks that followed were a test in patience and trust. Caleb started packing up his life bit by bit, while I tried not to let the distance cloud what we were building. We talked every day, calls that stretched late into the night, video chats that somehow made the miles feel smaller. There were moments I'd be lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, missing him so badly it hurt. But then he'd send a random text or a goofy selfie, and the ache would soften, replaced by this quiet hope. One weekend, I flew out to visit him in Chicago. Walking through the bustling streets with Caleb by my side felt surreal, like we were stepping into a new chapter together. We explored the city, trying deep dish pizza, which honestly was worth the hype, and spent hours just talking about everything and nothing. That trip was when I realized something important. Distance is just geography. What matters is the connection, the late night talks, the shared dreams, the knowing looks across a crowded room. After I got back home, we made a pact. No matter where life took us, we'd be honest, patient, and willing to fight for us. Months turned into a year. Caleb and I managed the long-distance thing better than I ever expected. Visits were planned around work schedules, surprise weekend getaways became a thing, and every reunion felt like coming home. One evening during one of his visits, we were sitting on my couch when Caleb pulled out a small box. My heart stopped. He opened it to reveal a simple ring. "I don't know if this is exactly how I imagined asking, but will you marry me?" Tears blurred my vision as I nodded, words caught somewhere between shock and joy. "Yeah," I whispered 1,000,000 times, "yes." In that moment, all the awkward beginnings, the uncertain steps, the challenges, everything that had brought us here, felt like the most beautiful story I'd ever be part of. And honestly, I wouldn't change a thing about how it all started. Because sometimes, the best love stories begin in the most unexpected ways. Saying yes to Caleb wasn't just a moment. It was the start of a whole new kind of adventure, one that honestly scared me as much as it excited me. I mean, marriage? That's a big deal, right? Especially for two guys who had stumbled into this relationship in the most awkward, unexpected way possible. After the initial high of the proposal settled, reality started to sneak in. Planning a wedding isn't as simple as just picking a date and showing up. We had to figure out where to live, because while Caleb adored Chicago and I was pretty rooted here, neither of us wanted to do the long-distance thing forever. Then came conversations about families, how to tell them, what to expect, and the inevitable moments of awkwardness that come with any big life change. I remember one afternoon we were sitting in my living room surrounded by an overwhelming mess of wedding magazines, spreadsheets, and Pinterest boards, and Caleb just looked at me with this mix of excitement and exhaustion. "Do you think we're crazy?" he asked, grinning sheepishly. I laughed, pulling him close. "Definitely, but the best kind of crazy." There was something comforting about knowing we were in this together, even when the future felt uncertain. The hardest part, honestly, was telling my parents. I'd always been relatively close to them, but coming out hadn't been the easiest conversation. When Caleb and I sat down with them, I could tell they were trying to process everything. The relationship, the engagement, the fact that their son was about to get married to a guy he met in the most unlikely way. At first, the silence was heavy. Then my mom reached out and squeezed my hand, eyes shining with tears. "We just want you to be happy," she said softly. That moment was a relief I didn't know I needed. It made me realize how much love and acceptance mattered, even when it came wrapped in awkward questions and unfamiliar territory. Meanwhile, Caleb was navigating his own conversations with his family, who, thankfully, were supportive, but also a bit bewildered by how quickly things were moving. I guess when you're the laid-back type, sudden big life changes can feel like a whirlwind. One night, after a dinner with his parents, Caleb turned to me and said, "Do you ever wonder if we're rushing?" I shrugged, a little nervous. "Sometimes. But then I think about that night on your couch when you proposed. I don't want to wait for something that feels right now." He smiled and kissed me gently. Me neither. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a blur of appointments, fittings, and trying not to lose my mind over the tiny details. Caleb was my anchor through it all, reminding me to breathe and keep perspective. On the morning of the wedding, I woke up with this strange mix of nerves and calm. I looked around my apartment, the place where this all started, and felt this overwhelming gratitude for every awkward moment, every stolen glance, every late-night conversation that brought us here. When Caleb arrived to pick me up, he looked stunning in his suit, and I swear my heart stopped for a second. We held hands in the car, squeezing each other's fingers, trying to soak in the gravity of what was about to happen. The venue was small, filled with close friends and family who'd supported us from the beginning. Walking down the aisle beside Caleb, I caught his eye and saw the same mixture of excitement and nerves mirrored back at me. When we finally stood at the altar, exchanging vows that were half serious, half laugh-out-loud funny, I realized that this wasn't just about us. It was about every moment that led here, the awkward first meeting, the late-night talks, the distances bridged, and the love that had quietly grown between USAs we kissed to seal our promises. The room erupted in cheers, and I felt this rush of happiness I hadn't known was possible. Later, Caleb whispered in my ear, "We did it." Officially stuck with each other, I laughed, pulling him close. "Yeah, and honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way." That night, as we danced under the soft glow of string lights, surrounded by people we cherished, I thought about that first day, how he walked in on me changing and didn't look away. It was more than just a moment of vulnerability. It was the beginning of a story I'd never want to end. After the wedding, when the confetti settled and the last of the guests had gone home, Caleb and I found ourselves alone in our little apartment, the one that had been my sanctuary long before he moved in. It felt different now, more like home than ever before. We sat on the couch, side by side, hands intertwined without thinking. Neither of us said much at first. Sometimes words just aren't necessary when the silence carries all the meaning you need. I looked over at him and smiled, thinking about how far we'd come. From that awkward moment of him walking in on me changing, to this quiet evening after saying, "I do." It was surreal but perfect in its own way. "You know," I started softly, "I never thought one accidental moment could change everything." Caleb chuckled, his eyes warm. "Me neither. But I'm glad it did." There was a peacefulness between us, the kind that comes from knowing you've found someone who sees all the messy, honest parts of you and still chooses to stay. In that moment, I realized that love isn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. It's about showing up again and again, even when it's messy or uncertain. It's about vulnerability and trust, the quiet everyday moments that build something real. Caleb rested his head on my shoulder, and I felt a deep contentment settle in my chest. This felt like the start of a lifetime of mornings and nights, of small jokes and shared dreams, of being seen and accepted exactly as we were. As the city lights twinkled outside our window, I thought about all the chapters still to come. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't scared to write them, with Caleb by my side.